It never fails. Tourists, anachronistically dressed up like Little House on the Prairie, walk into the 18th century Pasteur and Gault apothecary at Colonial Williamsburg and ask, what was their quackiest remedy? This is because of modern ideas that 18th century medicine was superstition and magic. Robin Kipps, manager of this apothecary museum, wants visitors to know 18th century professional medicine was heavily influenced by the science of the Enlightenment. Owing to survivorship bias, modern people often scoff at historical examples of dubious cures, despite their continued popularity today. However, scientific research performed during the 18th century led to breakthroughs in medicine that continue to benefit humankind today. What is survivorship bias? Survivorship bias occurs when only certain pieces of data are examined, leaving out key pieces that could tell a complete story and alter results. This can happen in scientific studies or when analyzing historical accounts or when configuring statistics. Most people have heard their grandparents say something to the effect of, SIDS didn't happen in my day, or autism wasn't around in my day. This is because they mistakenly believe their reality to be everyone's reality and don't account for discoveries that validate data they were simply unaware of. Many people think that medical science of the day killed George Washington and that this is proof of quackery. Ultimately, a throat infection, now believed to have been bacterial epiglottitis, killed America's first president. Bleeding him 4 times, totaling 80 ounces, may have contributed to his death in this case, but it was observed to improve high blood pressure, fever, and inflammation. It was done commonly and safely. We simply have better treatments nowadays. Even today, bleeding is still performed to treat rare blood diseases. It's easy to laugh at ridiculous-sounding treatments from hundreds of years ago, but there are still many people using ineffective and dubious cures. MLM essential oil company Young Living made over $213 million in 2022. This company claims to heal or prevent everything from depression to viruses, including Ebola, and rid homes of deadly black mold with no scientific evidence, and people buy them up. Just as bias and media have misrepresented corsetry based on extremes known as tight lacing, examples of outrageous remedies are used to reimagine the average medical practices as having been nonsense. The 18th century in particular was a time during which observations were made and theories were postulated. Medical science did not understand cells, germs, or advanced biology, but theories were made on observable data. Physicians were operating under what is now called evidence-based practice. William Buchanan theorized that hand washing and cleaning surfaces could prevent the spread of smallpox. He observed that smallpox lingered on surfaces and passed between people on items, even if he could not see the virus. Buchanan also realized that crowded places like prisons bred illness, even though he mistakenly thought that bad air was to blame. This was a common misconception of the time. Malaria was also believed to have been caused by this bad air or miasma rising from swamps. This might have been incorrect, but the treatment for malaria was logical and still in use today. Quinine-rich Peruvian bark or cinchona bark had been introduced to Europeans by the indigenous peoples of South America. They did not know what quinine was, but they knew that people who took the bark had a better chance of surviving malaria, and that same treatment is still the most effective. Advances made in the 18th century helped to eradicate or drastically reduce the effects of many illnesses that were once a death sentence. The smallpox vaccine is one example of these advances. In the East, people had been variolating against smallpox for some time. Variolation involved infecting a healthy person with the purulent matter from a smallpox or cowpox patient's sores. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu traveled throughout the Ottoman Empire with her husband, the English ambassador to Turkey, and she learned a great deal about health and hygiene from the Turks. Variolation was arguably the most important Ottoman practice she carried to England and the Western world. George Washington, a smallpox survivor himself, ordered Continental troops to receive variolation. Benjamin Franklin, whose own son had died of smallpox at just 4 years old, paid for impoverished Philadelphians to receive variolation. In 1796, Edward Jenner created a safer, more effective smallpox vaccine. In 1980, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox, which had killed many, many hundreds of millions of people throughout history, had been eradicated. Survivorship bias can have a powerful influence on any set of data, but especially on determining averages of a time period. 18th century physicians made strides in medical science that led to advancements that benefit 21st century people, but survivorship bias has incorrectly cast them as superstitious and ineffective. As historian Lindsay Kiter wrote, "Give it 250 years and we'll look stupid too." I chose this topic because I frequently address misconceptions about life in the 18th century and especially the American Revolutionary War. From the idea that stays and corsetry were dangerous, to the discussion of medical care, to 19th century revisions of wartime accounts, I encourage people to read reliable primary sources. In 2019, I gave a lecture at History Camp, Virginia, on the subject of reliable primary sources and historical myths. Repeating myths is like a centuries-long game of telephone.